Good morning, everyone. My name is Varad Deolankar. I'm a PhD student at the University of Michigan. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the conference organizers, Ken, Davide, and Minkyo, for firstly starting this conference last year and also hosting it again this year. It's nice to see the conference grow, and hopefully it keeps growing in the coming years, as all of us like this topic. So today I'll be talking about one of my projects that's titled Content Generation on Social Media, the role of negative peer feedback. This is joint work with my advisors, Jessica and Sriram. Just a small disclaimer, this paper is currently being revised, so today I'll present some new analysis which will soon also be added on to the draft on SSRM. Okay, so social media platforms sort of burst onto the scene roughly 2 decades ago, and since then they've gone on and become a very ubiquitous part of our lives. Now, an important feature of social media platforms is that the users of these platforms are the ones that supply content to these platforms, and that content is typically referred to as UGC or user-generated content. Now, a steady supply of UGC is important for the healthy functioning of these platforms. So, over the last decade or so, once these platforms started becoming more and more popular, a lot of researchers and practitioners started developing an interest in understanding what drives users to create content on social media. And so a large body of research that has developed since then has documented that platform design influences UGC creation. So folks have documented findings like attention is a big driver of subsequent UGC creation activity. Platform provided monetary incentives are also a big driver of subsequent UGC creation activity. And a large body of work has focused on the effects of positive peer feedback. And as Simha pointed out in his talk yesterday, what that means is that if users post something on social media and they receive a lot of feedback for it, mainly positive, then that sort of shifts their subsequent content creation activity in meaningful ways. And this literature is very nascent and is still sort of developing itself. So a lot of mixed evidence has been reported. Now, these findings are important because many social media platforms allow their users to only provide positive peer feedback. Right? And by positive peer feedback, I mean low cost, objectively positive signals that content viewers can send content providers. So take Instagram, for example. It's a popular social media platform. On this platform, content creators create content in the form of images or short videos, and content viewers can sort of consume that content and then provide positive feedback to the content creator using the heart button on Instagram. But there are many platforms out there that allow content viewers to provide both positive feedback as well as negative feedback to the content creator. And examples of these platforms include YouTube, Reddit, Stack Overflow, and so on. And recently, in the last 2 years, there has been a growing interest among platforms in terms of trying to understand how they should be eliciting negative peer feedback. So just in the last 2 years, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, which is now X, all of them were reported to be experimenting with their downvote or their dislike button. Now, what's so special about negative peer feedback? Well, what's special is that it can have a host of different ambiguous consequences on user behavior, which ex ante are very hard to predict. So on one hand, you can think of negative peer feedback as a stick. So let's say you post something on social media and you receive negative feedback for it. Well, that can discourage you from creating content again, meaning it can reduce your likelihood of subsequent content creation. It can also change the nature of the content that you produce subsequently. Let's say that you post something extreme on Reddit, which just happens to be your authentic point of view about a particular topic, and you receive negative feedback for your authentic point of view. Well, that can make you moderate the intensity of your content in the future. So negative feedback can play sort of a regulatory role on the platform. You can also think of negative peer feedback as a carrot, meaning the attention that comes with negative feedback can actually incentivize you to create more content in the future. And if it just so happens that the kind of individuals that are incentivized to create more content, that is increase their subsequent content production levels, are low quality users such as trolls, then they can bring the overall UGC quality levels on the platform down. Now, a large body of work in psychology has documented an interesting finding, which is that if you publicly receive negative feedback, then that sort of can trigger an ego defense tendency within individuals that can cause people to sort of dig into their heels and become more insistent or even more extreme when they subsequently talk about a given topic. So understanding which outcome or which combination of these outcomes occurs in response to users receiving negative feedback is important because those findings will have implications for polarization and echo chamber formation. Now, over the last 5 years or so, policymakers are growing increasingly concerned that there is something innate in the design of social media platforms that sort of make them propellants or fuelers of polarization or fertile grounds for echo chamber formation. And negative peer feedback system is one aspect which is innate to the design of social media platforms that we'll focus on in this paper. So let me explain the policymakers' concern with a couple of examples. Let's say that receiving negative peer feedback causes users that hold a certain kind of view to be silenced, or it discourages them from creating content again. Well, if that's the case, then there is some merit to the policymakers' concern that social media platforms are fertile grounds for echo chambers, because if one type of voice is consistently being silenced, then eventually the social media platform can become an echo chamber where just the popular belief keeps on reverberating. Let's say that the ego defense story is true, that receiving negative peer feedback causes people to become more insistent or more extreme in their point of view. Then that can increase negativity and drive conflict in the platform. So then there is some merit to the policymakers' concern that social media platforms are propellants or fuelers of polarization. So with this motivation in mind, in this paper, we asked the question, how does receiving negative peer feedback affect subsequent posting activity? And specifically, we look at two aspects of posting activity. One is posting incidence, meaning if you receive negative peer feedback, then does that make you more likely to post or less likely to post relative to not receiving any feedback? And we also look at how the nature of the content that you produce subsequently shifts in response to you receiving negative feedback. Meaning, does the intensity of your subsequent content increase or decrease upon you receiving negative feedback? Our proposition is that the answer to both of these questions will sort of produce findings that will advance our understanding of polarization and echo chamber formation on social media. Now, the setting in which we study this question is that of Reddit. Reddit is a popular social media platform, and the feedback system on Reddit is such that it allows content viewers to provide both positive feedback as well as negative feedback to content creators. And this feedback on Reddit is sort of publicly observable to everyone, the user receiving the feedback, the users, other users on the platform, as well as external observers, which is us, the researchers. Now, the way I've structured the rest of the talk is first, I'll give some background about Reddit, introduce some terminology, just so that you and I are on the same page. Then I'll talk about our data and some important features of our data set, and then I'll talk about our analysis and our findings. Okay, so Reddit, as we all know, is a very popular social media platform. It's the 8th most popular website in the world with 50 million plus DAUs. It recently had its IPO just a couple of weeks back, and so far the stock seems to be doing like meeting expectations. Now, how do you think about Reddit? So you can think about Reddit as a gigantic collection of subreddits. What is a subreddit? Subreddit is a discussion forum about a specific topic. And as of today, there are more than 180,000 plus active subreddits. So any topic you can think of, today there probably exists a subreddit about it. So once a subreddit is created, other users that are interested in having discussions about that subreddit can sort of join that subreddit and either interact with the content that is already present in the subreddit's content repository, or they can add to that subreddit's content repository. Now, how is content organized within a subreddit? So content within a subreddit is organized as a collection of submissions. Now, what is a submission? Submission is a thread initiation post. It can be a conversation starter or a question that a user asks about the topic associated with the subreddit. So here, for example, in the New Haven subreddit, a user is asking or starting a conversation about Mexican restaurants or delivery apps. Now, Reddit has a micro feedback system in place, meaning that each piece of content that is produced on Reddit receives feedback in the form of the score measure. Score is nothing but the sum of upwards and downwards accumulated by that particular piece of content. Now, once a submission is posted, users that want to partake in that discussion can post comments, which then appear in a threaded format beneath the submission. Now, on Reddit, these comments also receive feedback in the form of a score. And what's interesting is that the displayed score of comments can actually be negative. So what does a negative score mean? A negative score means that that particular comment received more downwards than upwards, and that fact is observable to everyone on the platform. Now, apart from a micro feedback system, Reddit also has a macro feedback system in place. So if you browse to a user's account page on Reddit, you will see that there are these karma points associated with each account. Now, what is karma? Karma is an aggregation of the score of each individual piece of content that has been produced by the user so far on the platform. And there are different types of karma points that users on the platform can earn. So there's post karma, which is an aggregation of the upwards and downwards accumulated by the submissions that have been posted by the user on the platform so far. And there's comment karma, which is again an aggregation of the upwards and downwards accumulated by the comments that have been posted by the user on the platform so far. Now, Reddit does not tell us how exactly score of each individual content contributes to karma, but they tell us that it's a monotonic relationship, meaning the more upwards your content accumulates, the higher your karma, the more downwards your content accumulates, the lower your karma. So over time, you can imagine that karma can sort of fluctuate in both directions, up and down. Okay. Now that we know a little bit about Reddit, let's understand our data. So what we did to answer our research question is we randomly picked 50 very popular subreddits on the platform. And on a sampling date, we selected 500 most recent submission creators in those popular subreddits. And then we programmatically stopped these users, meaning we programmatically tracked all of their posting activity over a 2-month observation window. So this resulted in a final sample of 17,525 users that collectively produced roughly 2 million comments in roughly 32,000 unique subreddits. So you see that users in our sample have sort of a wide reach on the platform. Now, for each piece of content that is produced by the users in our sample, we observe the following important pieces of information. We know the author of the post, we know the type of the post, meaning whether the post was a submission or a comment, we know the location of the post, meaning if the post was a submission, we know the subreddit in which the submission was made. If the post was a comment, we know the submission under which that comment was made and the subreddit to which that conversation belonged. We also observe the actual content, meaning the text posted by the user in our sample. And finally, a key piece of information which we observe is that we see how the score of each individual piece of comment or content fluctuates over time. So this is a very unique feature of our data set, which we will exploit when I explain the identification strategy in a few slides. Okay, let's look at a few sample descriptives. So first, let's look at user characteristics. So you see that on average, a user in our sample produces 0.05 submissions per day over the observation window and 1.805 comments per day. So straight away, you know that comments are a lot more common than submission. Now, this is a typical trait of any UGC corpus, and our UGC corpus shares this trait. In fact, 98% of the UGC corpus is just comments, so we focus our analysis on comments. Next, let's see how macro feedback varies across users. You see that the median user in our sample, as the fourth row indicates, is able to earn roughly 39 karma points on a given day. But there's a lot of variance on this dimension, meaning that some people lose karma, some people gain karma on average. So karma fluctuates. Next, let's look at how some statistic related to micro feedback. So here I'm showing you distribution in changes of a comment score. So the right side of 0 are those comments that whose score on a given day increased relative to the score on the prior day, meaning that comment experienced positive feedback. The left side of 0 are those observations or those comments whose score on a given day decreased relative to the score on the previous day, meaning the comment experienced negative feedback. So you see that conditional on receiving feedback, both positive as well as negative feedback are like equally common occurrence in our data. Yes, Shabasti?
So generally, do you look at?
Can you speak up?
Do you look at comments at all levels? So basically, you have the post and you have the first level comment, and you could have more comments and still using them. So for these users that you track for 2 months, you have all of their.
Yeah, regardless of the location in the comment forest, we have all of them.
And you treat all of them, like the karma calculation also treats any.
Yeah. Yes, Sherry?
I'm just curious. So Reddit, sometimes when they receive a lot of negative votes, they will feel ashamed and then delete the post or delete the thread. Do you observe that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what we do is we make sure that we scrape every comment on a daily basis. So to the extent that deletion, a comment getting flagged, being reviewed by a moderator and being deleted doesn't happen within a day, we get to still observe a comment. So because we are tracking on a day-to-day basis, comment occurrence, deletion occurrence is like relatively rare in our data because we get to observe that fact. So I think out of 2 million comments that these guys produce, roughly 1,000 deletions, so just 1,000 deletions. Okay. Now that we know a bit about Reddit, a bit about our data, let's come to our research question. So our first research question is looking at how does receiving negative feedback affect the likelihood of subsequent content creation? So for that, to answer this question, we make use of variation in comment karma. Now, why do we use comment karma? It's because a user can make multiple comments on a given day, and it's very difficult to attribute posting decision on a given day to feedback to one individual piece of comment. But Karma sort of provides a natural aggregation, which is platform provided, so we make use of it. And here's what we see. We see a positive correlation between the occurrence of negative feedback and the occurrence of comment creation. So the red bars are those observations where a user's karma in a given period decreased relative to the karma in the prior period, meaning the user's karma experienced negative feedback. The green bars are those observations where a user's karma increased in the current period relative to the karma in the prior period, meaning the user's karma experienced like positive feedback. And the blue bars are those observations where the user's karma didn't change. So you see that there's a positive correlation between two events, the occurrence of negative feedback and the occurrence of comment creation. So you can start with a simple specification where the dependent variable is a binary indicator for whether a comment is created on a given day. And you have an independent variable of interest with this, which is whether a user experienced negative feedback, meaning whether their comment karma decreased in a given period, in the prior period. Yes.
Before you go into identification, can you sell me on why comment creation is the right variable to focus on as a result of feedback?
Well, like I said, 98% of data that's out there is just comments. So that's the biggest chunk of the UGC repository that's out there.
So if you go back one slide, I would think in the red bar, I totally buy that, but I think we're probably looking at arguments that are occurring.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Whereas in the green bar, we're probably looking at a new UGC, like a different topic, a different thread, a different conversation. And so, as I've understood your outcome variable until now, we're going to group all types of UGC together, and that's why I'm asking. I mean, do we want more arguments? Do we care about certain types of UGC more than others? Do we want to disincentivize certain types of UGC?
So you're right that right now everything is pooled together, but like I don't know if negative because feedback is provided by everyone viewing the discussion. So I don't know if it would like how I would detect an argument even in this context. Because like everyone can provide feedback and the score can fluctuate in any direction. I agree with you that there are several explanations, one of which we pointed out that maybe just argumentation is going on. And I'll talk about other explanations as well and how I'll get to the question that I want to answer and then we can talk about how specific that result is to argumentation. Okay. Yes, Unnati?
Varad, I was just wondering, would you need to go more granular than at the day level? Because the karma point could be fluctuating anytime during the day.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure you're not capturing the outcome,
Yeah.
whether they comment or not, already having updated the karma score.
That's a good point. I would love to go more granular, but there are computational limitations with scraping data, so we were able to scrape data on a daily level. And you see the time script on the right hand side is t minus 1. So the feedback measure is actually the difference between t minus 2 and t minus 1, whereas the outcome measure is subscripted by t. So I have taken care of enforcing the temporal antecedence for causality. So that's a good point.
Is there a particular time of day when the karma score updates, or is it immediately real time when they comment?
It's real time, but I only observed like day-to-day. Okay, so if we start with the simple specification, then a lot of us would have problem with interpreting beta as the causal effect of negative feedback. Why? Because there are several explanations, one of which that Ken pointed out. So there are time invariant individual specific differences that can confound the causal relationship of interest. So a good example of these are trolls. Trolls are users, active users that tend to attract a lot of negative feedback. And these are users who are also likely to post because they are active users. So such intrinsic differences across users can confound the causal relationship of interest. There are unit invariant time period specific differences which can also confound the causal relationship of interest. A good example of this is the weekend effect. So on a Sunday, I am more likely to observe that a user creates a comment because I mean, I am really presenting on a Sunday, so I don't have time, but users on Reddit have time to create content on a Sunday, and they are also more likely to have been observed as receiving feedback on a Saturday. So that can also explain any observed correlation. And third is there are time-changing user attributes. So karma levels, activity levels, concurrent or contemporaneous argumentation levels that are going on that can also confound a causal relationship of interest. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage the fact that I have panel data, meaning I observe the same individual over time. So I observe their karma fluctuations over time and their posting decisions over time. And I'm going to employ user fixed effects and date fixed effects to control for these sources of confounding. And I'm going to control for these time-changing user attributes using karma levels in the prior period, whether or not the individual created a comment in the prior period, and so on, to like control for those sources of confounding. And then that would change the specification as follows. So instead of alpha, you now have alpha, alpha t, the fixed effects, and a matrix of controls in the form of Z delta. Now, even with this specification, we would all hesitate to interpret that beta is the causal effect of receiving negative feedback. Now, why is that? It's because I have not told you that there is any exogenous variation in beta. And if there is no exogenous variation in the independent variable, and if there is no exogenous variation, then we worry about the threat of omitted variable bias. And a good example of omitted variable bias in this case would be as follows. So imagine a user's karma decreases from 110 to 101, meaning user experiences negative feedback of 9 points. And let's say that a user said something about Ghostbusters in period t minus 2, and I observed that the user said something about Ghostbusters in period t. Now focus on period t. In period t, from my point of view as the researcher, two events occur concomitantly or concurrently. The receival of negative feedback in the prior period and the user creating a comment in the current period. Now, just observing that is insufficient to conclude that receiving negative feedback was what caused the user to create a comment in the current period. Why? Because maybe there was some unobserved event like a Ghostbusters remake, which was announced by some studio that was a controversial event, which I did not observe as the researcher. That could have driven both the occurrence of user receiving negative feedback as well as their likelihood of comment creation. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to employ an identification strategy, which we are going to account for this bias using the idea of threshold changes in karma. So imagine two scenarios, one in which a user's karma decreases from 110 to 101, same as before, and another in which user's karma decreases from 108 to 99. So these two instances are very similar, but there's one crucial difference, which is that the latter scenario is accompanied with a left digit change in the user's karma. And there's a wide literature on this left digit bias, which is that individuals tend to sort of evaluate differences differently if the destination variable in one difference crosses a threshold versus if it does not. So we are going to make the assumption that controlling for all the Z deltas, that is the time changing user attributes, left digit change, occurrence of a left digit change in a user's karma is plausibly exogenous, meaning it is likely to be uncorrelated with unobservables that affect subsequent posting activity. Yes?
how Reddit's ranking algorithm works. In
Uh,
the sense that if your karma goes down, your comments get demoted. And therefore, they're less likely to be seen, like the comments are less likely to be seen and less likely to be posted, and it's possible that ranking algorithm also is behind it. I don't know. Maybe
So-
Reddit is just.
So that's a good question. To the best of my knowledge, ranking and karma have no relation on Reddit. Comments are sorted according to the subreddit's default algorithm, which is just based on the score of that comment. So you're thinking of visibility of the comment as a potential confounder.
Yeah, so the score of the comment is independent of the user comment.
No, that can happen. That can happen. I agree.
I just don't know, I'm just asking. 'Cause I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it can happen. I agree. But the left digit change is like plausibly exogenous. Like whether that score fluctuation results in the aggregate left digit change of the user's karma.
Unless the algorithm also uses.
To the best of my knowledge, they don't. They don't use any karma input.
Just a little comment on that. Actually, a lot of subreddits do have filters whereby if you're below a certain threshold of karma, either within the community or overall, then it will actually automatically hide or automatically flag certain content.
So it's subreddit specific that you're saying.
Yes, and some of it's coming in through explicit rules that moderators set, so auto moderator rules. Some of it's coming in through the crowd control feature, which I think was there during your experiment time. And that is something that you just turn on and off at a subreddit level.
Okay.
We can
So
talk more about it offline.
Okay,
And
sure.
these things sound testable.
Yeah, I think I can test that using like exclude subreddits which are specific to us.
More than question.
Yes, Ali.
So, isn't it the case that if I'm around the threshold, I probably would have cared before?
You probably would have.
My activity like if I'm hovering around the threshold, my activity prior has something to do with that because I want to pass the threshold.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So let me move on. If you see the last independent variable, that's J of distance from threshold. So what we find in our data is that users who are around the threshold do not have different posting tendencies than users who are far away from the threshold. So we first include this as a control variable and then also just include the sample of users that are near the threshold and do a comparison within them to see if there's anything special about the level.
So let me understand. So if you're around the threshold, if I reverse the time, you're saying this argument doesn't work, but if you actually use forward time, it works.
Yeah.
So you can reverse the time, right? You can reverse the days and use the same thing. And
yeah.
you're saying it's not gonna work, but in actual time.
Yeah.
Just on a clarification, the left digit change may also interact with the magnitude of the drop. So not all left digit changes are the same.
Yes.
105 to 99 may be different from 101 to 99. Does that matter in your?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we were also worried about that. So what we did is firstly, we include the magnitude of feedback as a control variable. Second thing we did is we also conducted analysis on subsample where the magnitude was like reasonably small and we still found the effect. That's a good question. Okay, so to operationalize our idea, we sort of modify our specification as follows. So we have user fixed effects and date fixed effects, same as before. We have a binary indicator for whether negative feedback was received, same as before. We have a binary indicator for whether positive feedback was received, same as before. What's new is that we now have this binary indicator for whether a left digit change occurred in the user's karma, and we interact that with the binary indicators for negative feedback and binary indicators for whether positive feedback was received. And then we have our matrix of control variables, same as before. Now, the key thing we want to test is if there is a differential effect of negative feedback, when that negative feedback is exogenously accompanied with the left digit change versus when an equivalent amount of negative feedback is received but is not accompanied with the left digit change. So that's our identification idea. And we test that by estimating this regression, and the sign of the coefficient is what will inform us about the direction of the effect of negative feedback. And here we find that the sign of the coefficient is positive. That sort of tells us that the answer to our first research question is that receiving negative peer feedback increases the likelihood of subsequent content creation relative to not receiving any feedback. So, and we find a similar effect of positive feedback. So that's the answer to our first research question. Yes, Guy?
Because you argue we care about left digit bias, right? So then if I go down the threshold, wouldn't I want to post more, so earn more karma to come back again?
That's a good question. So in order to like tease out the mechanism driving this effect of sorts, we also have we don't have it in the paper now, but I'm doing an analysis where I want to see, do you keep posting till your left digit increases again? And if it increases, do you drop again? Do you stop posting them? So that's sort of a dynamic analysis that I want to do, which will sort of help me get evidence for the mechanism. But I'll talk about the mechanism only briefly for today's. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, yes, Andre.
The previous slide, so like, should we conclude that, I'm not sure we did it correctly, but is it concluding that?
Can you speak up? I can't hear you. Or maybe
No, correct. If it's positive feedback or negative feedback, regardless, it has the same effect, same magnitude on the number of comments, on the number of comments.
Yes,
right?
yes, the positive.
How do we think about this? So it's not about like me perceiving something about myself, not about sort of signaling. If just something changed and I'm more active, is that the way to think about this?
Yeah, so the mechanism that we posit is reputation management. So people are talking about things in a way that improves their standing on the platform. And feedback sort of affects that in both directions. Both balances of feedback affect that, and that makes users more likely to talk.
That's what, yeah, I need to think about it, but interesting. And one more small thing. Can you do placebo tests where you don't do it around the actual left digit?
Yes, that's a good point. We do that, and can't show it today, but it's there in the paper. Okay, so our next research question, our second research question is, how does receiving negative feedback alter the nature of subsequent content? And specifically, we are focusing on the intensity of subsequent content. I'll be more concrete about what exactly I mean by intensity in the next few slides. So in our sample, a user's comments can span multiple topics. So the same user can say, Bhopal is the best business conference, San Diego is the best vacation spot, Ghostbusters are good. It's likely to be me on the platform. And this, like I said, Reddit has a micro feedback system. So each individual piece of content receives feedback, a score. Now, our expectation is that feedback only affects the topics towards which it is direct. So that means that our research question in simple terms is this. If a user says that Ghostbusters is a good movie and they receive negative feedback for it, then the next time they talk about Ghostbusters, do they say that Ghostbusters is the best freaking movie of all time? Or do they moderate themselves and say that, in my opinion, Ghostbusters is above average, something like that? So that's what we want to see. So that at least two challenges we need to address before we can answer this question. First is we need a method of quantifying sentiment from text. Remember, I told you I observe the actual text posted on the platform. So how do we quantify sentiment from text? So to do that, we use Google's NLP API. Specifically, we make use of its entity sentiment analysis service. What is entity sentiment analysis? It's an advanced form of sentiment analysis, which doesn't just tell you that this statement is very positive, very negative. Instead, it detects entities present within that statement, meaning person, location, organization, name, place, animal, thing, sort of a thing. And then it tells you how the author of the input text is talking about those detected entities. So it's like one level beyond just traditional sentiment analysis. Now, Google's entity sentiment analyzer returns three metrics for each entity detected within the input text. They tell us a sentiment score, which is a scalar between -1 and 1 that indicates the sentiment expressed towards the detected entity. You have a magnitude score, which is a non-negative scalar that tells you the strength of the emotion with which the user is talking about that particular entity. And you also have a salient score, which is the importance of that entity in that entire input text. So it's a scalar between 0 and 1. And the salient score of all entities that are detected add up to 1. So here's an example. Let's say that the user says, Winston is my favorite Ghostbusters. The NLP API will tell you that there are two entities, Winston and Ghostbusters. This statement is more about Winston than Ghostbusters as indicated by the salient score. And the sentiment is positive towards both and the emotionality score is also positive. Now, there are a lot of neutral statements which are made as well, such as, why did you want the switch? And the API does a decent job of saying that while there are entities present, no sentiment is expressed towards these entities as such. And if you look at the distribution of the sentiment score and the magnitude score, you see that there's a concentration of observations around 0. That means that a lot of entities are spoken about in a neutral tone, but there is also variation, which means that people do also express sentiments towards entities. Yes, Kyle?
So before we move on, so why not just use some open source, more transparent model instead of using Google API?
That's a good point, but this is the most powerful model that's out there.
My concern is that it's a commercial API that's not transparent, right? And then the issue is the algorithm keeps changing in the backend.
Yeah.
And 2 years later, if someone wants to replicate a study, we wouldn't be able to do it because Google changed their thing, not in your control. Right? 10 years later, Google doesn't exist. People really have to go like Google. I think it's better if you use open source model. Everyone knows exactly the algorithm.
That's a good suggestion. Although in my experience, I will say this, that there are, in terms of results of entity sentiment analysis, there are not massive differences.
So it's probably getting similar.
Yeah.
Just in terms of replication, open science.
That's a good suggestion. That's a good suggestion. Thanks. Okay, so we have a method for quantifying sentiment from text. A second challenge that we face is that feedback is not provided at the entity level. It's provided for the entire comment, which contains a set of entities. So we need some method of aggregating these sentiments expressed towards entities up to the host level again. So just to be clear, my dependent variable of interest is the intensity of the first next mention of the salient entities in the original comment. Again, the intensity of the first next mention of the salient entities in the original comment. So If the user says Winston is my favorite Ghostbusters, and remember I said that a key feature of our data is we observe how the score of this comment fluctuates over time. So we observe how the score decreases, how the score fluctuates between the tau equal to 0, tau equal to 1, tau equal to 1, tau equal to 2, and so on. And let's say that if we observe that with this particular comment experiences a decrease in score, meaning it gets negative feedback, and this individual says something about Winston on just the next day or just after that score decrease, we want to see how do they talk about Winston. Do they say he's the best movie character of all time, or do they moderate themselves? Now there are several challenges here. What if the user makes another comment about a different entity in the original comment? So the way we address that is by computing a weighted average of the absolute value of the sentiment score at the time of the first next mention of the salient entities, where the weight is the salient score of the entity in the original comment. So that's how we do this aggregation. I only explained it briefly, but it's there in detail in the paper. So I would love to get some feedback on that. And we only consider an entity to be salient if it's above the sample median, but we do robustness checks around this threshold. Okay, so now we have a dependent variable. We are able to construct the dependent variable out of text. So then we specify the following regression. Now again, we are operationalizing the same idea, which is that changes in score of the original comment are likely to be more salient or perceived more strongly when that score of the original comment crosses a threshold. So here we make use of the sign change threshold in the score of the original comment. Because remember, I told you that displayed score of the comments can be negative on the platform. So we use that idea where our dependent variable is the intensity of the first next mention of the salient entities in the original comment. We have fixed effects, user fixed effects, date of next mention fixed effects, days elapsed since the original comment fixed effects, and subreddit of the original comment fixed effect. So lots of fixed effects. Just like before, we have binary indicators for whether the score of the original comment decreased, meaning whether it got negative feedback, or whether it increased, meaning whether it got positive feedback. Now we expect that feedback, this size should be subscribed, I apologize, but we expect the effect of feedback to vary depending on the intensity of the original comment. So we have that interaction there. And we have flexible controls for time changing comment attributes in this case, just like we had. And the way we operationalize that, then identification and assumption for this particular analysis becomes that controlling for time changing comment attributes, we say that whether or not a sign change occurs in the score of the original comment, that is uncorrelated with unobservables that affect future intensity. So the main coefficient of interest then is this beta 4 and gamma 4 for positive feedback. So what we want to see is that if the original comments score decreases from 4 to 1 versus if it decreases from 2 to -1. So in both cases, the score of the original comment decreased by 3 points, but there was one crucial difference, which is that in the latter case, the score of the original comment sort of crossed a threshold. So it's likely to be more salient or felt more strongly. So this is again, that's what results in this sort of a bit complex regression where the key coefficient of interest is beta 4 for effect of negative feedback and gamma 4 for effect of positive feedback. And here's what we find. So the left side is the effect of negative feedback. The right side is the effect of positive feedback. Focus on the left side. On the left side, the x-axis is the intensity of the original comment. The y-axis is the predicted intensity of the first next mention of the salient entities in the original comment. The solid line are those instances where the original comment score decreased, meaning it experienced negative feedback, but that feedback was not accompanied with the sign change in the score of the original comment. And the dotted lines are those observations or those instances where the score of the original comment decreased by an equivalent amount and it was accompanied with a sign change. So we find that there's a negative effect of negative feedback on intensity. What that means is that if I say something relatively intense, I receive negative feedback for it, then I am likely to reduce the intensity about that particular topic for which I receive negative feedback in the next mention. We do not find such an effect for positive feedback. So this difference between the green dotted line and the solid line, that's not significant. So we don't find any intensity moderation effect of positive feedback. Now, I use text, which is fundamentally an unstructured modality of data, to construct my dependent variable. So there were a lot of assumptions that I made while constructing that measure. In the interest of time, I could not get into the depths of it. But we do all of these in the paper. I'd love to get your feedback on what more we can do. And the result seems to be pretty robust to these modeling choices. One robustness test, which I would like to talk about that Andre brought up earlier, was this idea of a placebo test. So we did that in the intensity analysis and the incidence analysis both. So here I'm showing you the result for the intensity analysis. This is the actual result. The red is the effect of negative feedback. That is what we find, an intensity moderation effect. The green is the effect of positive feedback. We don't find that. So this is the actual treatment effect. But what we did is we redefined the sign change threshold indicator to be 1 when no sign change had occurred, when some random threshold like 1 had been crossed, 2 had been crossed, 3 had been crossed, or -1 had been crossed, -2 had been crossed, and so on. And we don't find effects when we shouldn't find effects. So there's something special about this 0, which leads us to believe that it is a plausible exhaustion shift. Yes.
In the previous slide, I'm tempted to interpret this result as evidence of echo chamber formation, sort of like how groupthink develops. People who deviate are punished and then moderate their speech afterward. Do you think that'd be a fair interpretation, or do you think of this differently?
So I think of it mainly speaking to the polarization implication, that you reduce the intensity of subsequent content, that sort of reduces polarization. In the interest of time today, I won't show some analysis, but in the paper I have it. So remember, I told you, observe the location in which people create content. So what analysis which we tried out was, if you receive negative feedback, then are you more likely to be driven out of that space and create content in another space, and reduce your content creation in the space in which you are likely to receive negative feedback? Now, if I would say that, if I would observe or find that I am less likely to create content in the space in which I receive negative feedback, then I would say that maybe negative feedback sort of exacerbates or accentuates echo chambers, but I don't find that. So that's what the analysis speaks so far. So with regards to echo chambers, I would say the implication is that there's no evidence that negative feedback accentuates or exacerbates echo chambers, but they do regulate polarization.
One other related, so when you post a comment that gets to a certain threshold, the service gives you a notification.
Okay.
So I wonder if that could give you a second type of discontinuity to look at positive feedback on intensity.
Yep, I agree, but I don't know the threshold used by Reddit to sort of send that notification. I don't have that.
It's 5.
Oh, you know that?
Yeah, I use it sometimes.
Oh, okay, then Jessica, let's do something around that. Thanks a lot, Ken. Okay,
I have a quick question.
yes, Ali.
So you have the sentiments. And I'm going way back, T-2, go back in time. So I put something that is crazy, okay, in terms of sentiment. I'm in the extreme. Am I more likely to receive feedback?
Are you more likely to receive feedback?
Because then the identification comes from after that, right? Once I receive feedback, how do I change my behavior? So go back in time. If I do crazy stuff, right, which I don't usually. If I do crazy stuff, am I more likely to receive feedback? And are you worried about that?
So,
Because if I do crazy stuff, there's a reversion to me too, right? Because
Yeah.
normally I do normal stuff.
that's a good point. I will talk about it in a couple of slides. So it's a good point. Thanks. So, the empirical finding is both positive and negative feedback increase propensity to post. Negative feedback reduces the intensity of subsequent content, and there's no such effect of positive feedback. Now, going back to the mechanism that Andre was curious about, in the paper, we posit 2 mechanisms that could be driving the effect. One is reputation management, and the other is sort of people learning what to say. We rule out learning, we don't find evidence for learning. We are finding evidence for reputation management, which sort of explains this effect using the analysis that I was discussing with Kai earlier about when people stop posting. That will be a part of the new version. So, key takeaway, negative feedback encourages participation, reduces intensity of subsequent content. This implies that negative feedback serves as the whip that could regulate polarization. But going back to Ali's point, if everyone is driven towards a moderate opinion, then is that a sign of echo chamber? And I think, Ken, you were also sort of alluding to that earlier. So that's the cliffhanger on which we end the paper because it's already too long. But there's some future work I would be interested in doing to sort of speak to that as well. So that's all I have for today.
All right, thanks a lot. First, thanks to the organizers for all the hard work putting this conference together. I think it's a really nice addition to our set of conferences. I hope it continues and grows. And thanks for having me discuss this paper. I think this has the potential to be a really important paper. So let me sort of motivate it my own way. So first, I think this is a large and important setting. It's not just a big platform, but the content on Reddit, I think, is important. So it's used in a lot of search results. It often is the top Google search result. Reddit comments are a major source of training data for large language models. So I think even those of us who are not big Reddit users should care about the quality of content on Reddit and that there's a lot of it and that it's good. So I think it's a good thing to study. And I also add that a comment applies to this paper as well, Alex's paper. And then we have two sort of important questions about platforms also in this paper. The first is a classic one that there's been a lot of studying on, which is, you know, how can platforms encourage more activity and more posts, more comments, and you know, they have all these mechanisms, whether it's likes or tips or whatever. I think that in general, this literature has focused mostly on measurement because all these things are positive, and so we sort of assume that they're going to create more content. And so we just have to measure the effect correctly. But in this case, there's something quite novel, which is this negative feedback aspect. And it's theoretically ambiguous whether having negative feedback is actually going to encourage more content or it could discourage content. It could take some new users and cause them to post less if they get negative feedback. So there's theoretical ambiguity in addition to the measurement issue. And it relates also to this question of how platforms should moderate their content. So different, platforms have different models here, whether it's like hiring an army of people somewhere to like manually delete posts or to have some red lines, which say, you know, anything that crosses this line gets deleted. Or what we've seen in Reddit, which is this crowdsourced platform, or now on X, sort of crowdsourcing fact checking as well, and showing, letting people sort of correct things through, you know, user-generated content moderation. So this is an example of that as well. And I think it's an interesting model that's worth studying. All right, so the problem though is that while we hear a lot about how platform mechanisms can increase user behavior, this is a very challenging thing to study because user behavior is correlated with user behavior. And so most feedback is correlated with, you know, the amount of posting you're doing. And so there's just fluctuations in activity over time that are leading to big changes in the amount of feedback you're getting and the amount of posting you're doing. Right, so it's just fluctuations in activity, whether these are random fluctuations in activity, whether they're driven by specific news events or pop culture events or whatever, are driving the vast majority of the relationship between the feedback you're receiving and the amount of content you're posting. So it's going to be very hard to isolate the relatively small causal effect between these two things amidst this very large sort of simultaneous relationship. Okay, so what can we do about it? Perhaps there's an IV, something that exogenously changes feedback. Maybe better than that would be a platform policy change. So we could look before and after this policy change, and we have papers by Xiang and Shrivastava yesterday that look at before and after platform policy changes to this type of question. I think that's good. I think even better is an RCT on the platform. So like seeing this paper yesterday, we see an experiment on the platform. I think that's even better for particularly measuring the magnitude of this effect. But if we don't have those things, then we have to do something else. And so this paper proposes a novel identification strategy, which is looking at quasi-experimental variation which is driven by random variation, not in feedback, but in salience of feedback. Right, and then what's nice about this is the estimation is straightforward. It's actually basically just a regression discontinuity. And it's similar to a lot of the regression discontinuity papers we've seen, and you can apply similar toolkits. But the assumption is conditional on a level of feedback. Some of it is going to be randomly more salient than others because it forces this karma score to cross a left digit threshold. Right, so we can measure the causal effect kind of feedback, but really of the salient changes in total feedback. So we're sort of measuring the causal effect of that salience. Okay, and then what the paper finds is that both types of feedback impact people's behavior. They both cause people to post more. And this wasn't really emphasized, but actually the magnitudes of these effects are quite large. They both have quite large effects on future behavior. This wasn't really talked about in the talk, but positive feedback causes people to post more in the same threads and in the same subreddits, and negative feedback is more no result on that. And then more intense posts that receive more negative feedback are followed by less intense posts, which is interpreted as that negative feedback is having a moderating effect. Okay, so that's the summary. So thinking about this not identification strategy, I think it's interesting, it's novel, so I was like, well, what other settings can we apply this to? What do we need for this to work? So first, we need some cumulative metric that's separate from the individual content feedback metric. So in this case, the content feedback metric is the comment score, and then the karma score is the cumulative one. I don't think it would work if you just have the comment feedback metric, because people leaving that feedback, are observing that. And so if it's close to 100, they might be more likely to click like or up or down, or try to keep it away from the threshold or something. It could cause a problem. So you need a separate one that's cumulative, and that's the one that matters. And that cumulative one has to be salient, and users have to care about it. So they have to see it and care about it. It also can't be related directly to other types of things like badges or tiers. So if you cross 100, you get a badge. That would cause a complication in isolating the effect. And then we also ideally would have users not change their behavior near the left digit thresholds. That would be ideal. Alternatively, this is something we can try to control for. And controlling for it is not exactly straightforward, as came up during the talk, but this is the idea. All right, so I was trying to think about other applications for using this strategy. And so I thought of one, and this is like a free paper idea if anybody wants to do this. Is like, well, what is the causal effect of getting citations on number of papers you write? Okay, so we have a cumulative feedback metric that's unrelated to the content feedback metric, and it's salient and valued by users. So it's like, I wake up and my citations have crossed 600, and does this motivate me to write more papers? You could write that paper. Now, there might be other users, and I'm not going to name names, except, well, I'll name one name. So this type of person might get an extra 100 citations, and they don't even notice because that's the number of citations. It's
like Tuesday, right?
It's just like, I go out for my 10-mile run.
It's fake news, that's not mine.
This is a typo. Okay, but there's actually a point. So it's not just that, these are different orders of magnitude. But there's probably different treatment effects as a result of that, right? So like a new Reddit user might be more motivated by getting more feedback, and then someone who's been around for a while will probably have a different treatment effect, and it could even be a different size. So like, you might get to 7,000 citations and realize, oh, maybe I don't need to write 50 different papers about Airbnb this year. Go work for Amazon and expand my Rolex collection instead. So it's a negative treatment effect.
Is this love or hate? There is a mix. I don't know. I just think it's
The
love.
problem is you did write another paper.
Yeah, or you do both. Yeah, so
Would you like to be a discussant again next year?
you do this every year. Yeah.
It showed the difference from last week.
We want to think about it. But the point, I think, is that the treatment effects could be quite different, could even be negative for very high values. Okay, so other things that this raises is like So the real reason you couldn't write this paper is that the timing is very bad, right? So there's huge lags in paper writing, but there's timing issues, I think, in general, especially, anytime you're doing regression discontinuity with a continuous time variable, and this bites in two ways. So one is what Anadi said, which is, the threshold changes happen quite granularly, and it could go back and forth over the course of a day. And so that's tough. That's measurement error on one side. And the other is, because regression discontinuity requires us to look at fairly tight windows, you're looking basically, did you post more the next day? And I'm not sure and I think that's fine, but I think the bigger question is like, when you get more feedback, do you post more in general? And it probably doesn't happen immediately necessarily. It's probably longer run effects that are more sort of important than just the short-term effect. And the other issue with the left digit strategy is this relatively few observations that cross these thresholds. And so it's, hard to have very strong identification for this. Now, both of these, I should say, really are just pushing the estimates towards zero. So these top two bullet points make everything smaller. And the fact that you find significant effects suggests that, you're overcoming that problem. But in general, it's something to think about for this strategy. And then this third one, we're still including the endogenous variable in the regression, and the effect being measured is the interaction of the endogenous and exogenous variable. And to me, endogenous plus exogenous still equals endogenous. I talked to the authors all separately yesterday, and I read the paper, and they talk about this in the paper, and I'm like 90% convinced it's okay, but I'm not 100% convinced that it's okay. And if I was your referee, which I'm not, then I would ask you to go a little further in really showing that it's okay to do that. Okay, so a couple other nitpicky things. Some of this came up. Maybe I'll skip that. I'm a little worried about in the intensity measure about mean reversion. There's a simple mean reversion, and you do, I think, a placebo test. But I have a different placebo test in mind for thinking about this, which is not related to feedback. It is just related to comparing the future and past intensities of posts and seeing if there's generally mean reversion. Post something extreme, and then later you post something that's extreme. And then more broad suggestions. So first, I think intensity is an interesting metric, but I would have liked to see more about post quality. And this could be proxied for by like the length of the post or the number of topics in a very simple way. You could look at the up and down votes on future posts and see if the feedback you receive in the past changes those. That one's a little tricky, obviously, because you're using votes in both places. But maybe you could like train a model on up and down votes and then use that to give an objective score of post quality. But I think this sort of gets to Ken's initial point, which is I think a good one, which is, we care we don't just want people to post more, we want better content in a sense. And then the local average treatment effect of this strategy as identifying, like I said, is not exactly the effect of feedback on behavior, but the effect of salience of feedback on behavior. And there might be interesting platform implications here. So like one thing they might take away from this is that, this encourages more, we want to encourage people to leave more feedback. But it could just mean, well, we should just make this karma score more salient. If the salience is what's causing the behavior, then increasing that salience, maybe it's sending push notifications or something, then that would actually accomplish the same thing. And then lastly, you mentioned this came up, but in this case, moderate content is defined by the most active users in the group, both in the sense that there's a group or subreddit level fixed effect, and those are the people who are voting a lot. And so, yeah, it suggests that moderate is not quite the right term. It's like driving people to conform to the group norm, which in an insular community could make actually more extreme and not less extreme. So sort of going back to this, if there's a way to create objective measures of content moderation and studying the outcome there, I think that would be good. So I think sort of to summarize, I think it's a really good, important question. This identification strategy is not perfect, it's not an RCT, but I think it's sufficiently good to address what is a big, important question. But I would like to see you go a little further and think about some of these other issues. Thanks.